Hello, I'm Erica Ingram, and I'm presenting the 1516 Biology Unit 10 Classification Curriculum Overview. Unit 10 classification will begin on February 22nd and go through March the 1st. For this unit, we have 7 days that's been allotted by TRS as well as on the GPISD YAG. This unit will not be assessed on a Q3 summative, it will be assessed on a Q4 summative. Our supporting standards are in green. 4A is over prokaryotes and eukaryotes, which has been spiraled in. And our newest standards are supporting 8A and 8C, and our readiness is 8B. We have a number of processing skills that will be embedded throughout the unit as well. And starting off looking at our prior to this unit, we always focus in on the prior to the unit because we know that is where we get our engage. And from our prior to this unit, we are accessing student prior knowledge from grade 6, grade 7, and what's been covered already in biology. Later on in the presentation, I'm going to demonstrate what an engage lesson frame would look like to give you a better idea of how to use this information in the prior to this unit. Now, during this unit, students will get more familiar with taxonomy. They'll understand who the scientists were who discovered taxonomy and classification systems. They'll understand the difference between the two. They'll also explore the similarities shared among different groups and how they're classified, as well as understand the kingdoms that they are classified into, and analyze phylogenetic trees as well as cladograms. So this is a pretty in-depth unit, but it's pretty simple and easy at the same time, so it will allow a lot of exploration for the students to understand the material. And after this unit, the students will use this basic understanding of the information about the kingdoms and the foundation that they have in order to better understand bacteria, plants, and the body systems of animals in the units to follow. Now, as we look at our district level data over Q4 summatives, we can see that for 4A, that SE was not assessed on the Q4 summatives in 13-14 or 14-15, excuse me. That's why you see X's there. For B8A supporting and B8B's readiness and 8C supporting, we can see that in 13-14, looking at our data, the students pretty much struggled a little bit with the concept, although it's easy to some extent. They still have to make connections of what taxonomy has to do with evolution and the diversity of species in order for them to understand that classification and taxonomy. And so we can see that there's been some struggles with that area, as well as looking at 14-15. Now, the on-level data for 14-15 is correct, but there were some gaps in the number of students tested when we looked at the pre-AP data as well. And I'm sorry, the pre-AP and the on-level data is a little skewed, but overall you can see that our numbers dropped. We can still look at these numbers and see that our numbers dropped and students struggled more in 14-15 than they did in 13-14. So in this school year, we want to definitely make sure we're addressing those SEs and allowing enough time and exploration for the students to get the understanding of classification and how it connects to evolution and the diversity of species. Now, looking at our STAR data, we can see that in 12-13 and 2015, I'm sorry, I said 2013 and 2015, all four of these SEs were assessed each of those years. And looking across of how we did on those SEs, we progressively got better with 4A because it spiraled in so much. On 8A, we did not do so hot. We did not do so well in 14-15 as we look at it in 13. It was not assessed in 12. B8B, we've struggled with that over the past years. 2014 was a pretty good year. However, 2015 was not a good year. And then our last SE supporting 8C, we still have the same struggle. So This is a concept that they struggle with, and if they don't have the strong foundations in the previous concepts of the cell, the complexity of the cell, understanding genetics, understanding all of those previous taught concepts, then they tend to struggle when they get to evolution. So we have to make sure that they have a solid foundation in those previous units, because all the units connect. And so that's what's, I believe, is affecting our scores in 2015, that the students aren't making those connections and they aren't able to see the big picture. So at this point, we're going to start looking at how the state is interpreting B8A. We should have already deconstructed our SE before we try to understand what the state or how the state is interpreting the SE. We understand our verbs in this SE is define and recognize. We understand the content that we're defining and recognizing is taxonomy, as well as the importance of standardized taxonomic system. And in what context is this being applied? It's being applied to the scientific community. And as we go through and read the question, you can read it at your own leisure. The question is, why is it best for scientists to use the name for standardized taxonomic system? And even if the students did not read the narrative that they gave, or as an example of different types of common names, why is it best for scientists? That's the question. They have to understand why is it best for scientists, not for anyone else, just for scientists. And the answer was all scientists will be using one name for mountain lions. So that name or scientific name for the mountain lion is going to be universal to any scientist anywhere in the world, regardless of the common name. If you use the scientific name, it's going to be universal. So that's why it's used. As I mentioned before in the overview of the unit, we're going to be looking at cladograms throughout this unit that the students would have to understand. And so this first cladogram is B8B. I'm sorry, the SE for the cladogram is covered under B8B. Categorize organisms using hierarchical classification systems based on similarities and differences shared among groups. And this hierarchical classification system is just one of the different types of classification systems that are available to use. So this is just one type that the students will have to be familiar with and know how to read. All the animals to the right of the hagfish, locate the hagfish, would have the common characteristic of, and so they have to understand that everything before the animal has. So this perch, every characteristic before the perch, that perch has. Every characteristic before the salamander, it has. Every characteristic before the lizard, it has, and so forth and so on. And so what characteristic would all of these animals have past the hagfish? And that answer is jaws. And so the students would be able to use those processing skills and learn how to read this in their explore activity, and then be able to answer it when they're evaluated or assessed in any type of way. Now I won't go through all of the questions, but as you can see, there are different types of tables, diagrams used to classify organisms, looking at their similarities and differences. And a table is one of them. And in this question, it's a readiness standard being addressed again, and they're using a processing skill. Now, in a question from 2013, looking at question 19 on the same SE readiness standard, we're using processing skill 2F, and the students have to utilize the dichotomous key in order to classify this animal. So this is the picture of the animal. They have to go through the dichotomous key and look at its characteristics, determine if it has it, if it doesn't have it, and where to go to next in order to identify this animal, or what category it should be classified into. And our last SE of focus is B8C, compare. Compare characteristics of taxonomic groups Now it says including, so it's telling you exactly how they're going to be assessed, which taxonomic groups they're going to be assessed on, which is archaea, bacteria, protists, fungi, plants, and animals. And so the focus here is not so much on what type of graphic organizer they're using to compare. They're focusing on, do you know the characteristics in order to compare the different organisms and put them in their proper taxonomic group. And so this is just one example that they're using. They're using a Venn diagram. You can use double bubble maps. You can use a matrix. You can do different types of graphic organizers because you never know how they're going to be assessed or what graphic organizer they'll be given in the use. So it's really focusing on the content versus what type of organizer. Now, initially, TRS had 2 PAs, but for 7 days, that's not feasible to give in-depth instruction for 2 PAs. And so last school year, the biology department again modified the PA and they combined PA 1 and 2 into 1 PA. And so this year, again, we're going to utilize the GPISD modified Unit 10 PA. So there will only be 1 PA for this unit. So you'll only have one complete lesson cycle for this unit, Unit PA1, Unit 10 PA1. And as you can see, there are 2 parts where they will be still addressing the same things that they would from breaking it down into 2 PAs. Now they'll be breaking it down just into 2 parts of 1 PA. And so as I was going through the questions, we've been looking at the different SEs, the readiness standards, the supporting standards, and so forth. And so now we have our bundling of how we're going to look at this unit. All of these SEs will be combined together to focus on this 1 PA. And you have your specificities that will give you more direction on what you should be focusing on, definitely what you should be including in the different types of hierarchical classification systems, as I mentioned before, dichotomous key, phylogenetic, diversity between the species, cladograms, all of those, and then looking at how to compare in the specifics of each of those domains and kingdoms. And I also want to remind you that in the secondary shifted resources Dropbox is the original modified PA, and it has some very good resources available inside of it. It has some good essential questions or daily guiding questions that you can use as pretty much a daily question to help the students accountable that at the end of this lesson today, you're going to be able to answer this question. And so you please use those questions, integrate them into your lessons however you see fit. Here are some essential questions that I pulled from the IFD, and it was provided for the unit understandings for each of the PAs. And so all of those questions are here that you are able to use however you see fit. I believe the best place to use these would be in the explain portion, or you can use it in your elaborate, and you can make it applicable in your evaluate as well. Key content vocabulary, cladogram, phylogenetic trees, dichotomous keys, hierarchical classification system, taxonomy, and then again you have a ton of related vocabulary that you can use. That will be introduced in this unit, and please see your IFD for additional terms. You have only 2 misconceptions. There may be more, but these are the 2 main misconceptions. Students may think animals and plants are the only living organisms, which we know that's not true. And students may lack the morphological vocabulary needed to accurately use dichotomous keys and phylogenetic trees. So we want to make sure they're using the academic vocabulary as they go through the process of learning the material. Now here's an example engaged lesson frame. I told you I would go into more detail about the prior to this unit. I developed this engaged day lesson frame just based strictly off the prior to this unit. And you can go back and read the prior to this unit so you can see exactly how I made those connections and how I developed each of these activities. I have my objective and product. We will categorize prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells and organisms and classify using a dichotomous key. Closing product, I will explain how prokaryotes and eukaryotes are classified and how a dichotomous key is used to classify an organism or an object. And so we start off, and I put timers by each of those just for a 50-minute, 45-minute, 50-minute class period. You start off with making connections. Make connections to what they should already know from the previous units, the previous concepts addressed in 6th and 7th grade. Students will be students will be shown an evolved let me correct myself. Students will be shown evolved images of an organism, for example, the antelope, and explain how diversified species that evolved over time need to be classified. Then you will have the students to identify the domains and kingdoms that they can recall, and you would list those on the board. So that's a good opening, just to get their minds going, talk out as a class, get them talking, and have those conversations before you go into further parts of the lesson activities. The first activity I would have them do is each group would have a set of cards, and those cards would have the captions prokaryote, eukaryote, plantae, animalia, and bacteria. And coinciding with those captions, you will have different images related to cell structures, organelles, and animals that can be classified into at least one of those categories. And so the students will get approximately 10 to 15 minutes and will have to categorize those different cell structures or organelles or organisms into the proper category. And then afterwards, I would send them into their next activity where they would then have to pair up, and they will be reintroduced to the dichotomous key. Well, they'll have to rotate through a lab station. I would give them 1 to 2 minutes. They will rotate through the lab station and identify sports equipment. And this is an activity that's been used in the former C-scope activity that students found to be very useful. You can use images of the sports equipment, or you can use the actual sports equipment, or you can use a mixture of both. That is up to you. But it is a good activity to get them reintroduced to it, because it's something they're familiar with, but they have to go through each of those characteristics to identify which sports equipment is being described. And at the closing, for the last 10 minutes, I'll take about 5 minutes, and I have the students to go back and explain to me what they did in those two activities, or you can use more time, however you need to allocate, and explain to me what they did and what was the main thing that they needed in order to identify what organism would go where, or what sports equipment was what. And so what you want them to tell you is that I needed to know how to classify based off the characteristics that this cell had, this organism had, or the sports equipment. I need to know characteristics, and I need to understand the similarities and the differences between those different characteristics so I can properly categorize them where they belong. And so that's just one example. You can use tons of different examples, but whatever you do, please make sure you are connecting it to the previous unit some way, somehow. Use the prior to the unit and connect it to previous knowledge that they should have, even from 6th and 7th grade. That is so important, because it leaves a gap where they don't understand why they had to do that information back in 6th and 7th grade, because they're going to say, oh, I remember this, but I need to understand why I'm doing this, and I need to understand what this has to do with genetics and what this has to do with evolution. So all of this connects, and that's just a brief explanation of what I did, just to give a quick rough draft of an engaged activity or an engaged day, and how to access their prior knowledge and use the different activities to do so. If you have any questions about that, feel free to call me and I'll explain in depth. Thank you. Now, lastly, this is our important reminders. STAR A accommodations are on the board builder. Please communicate with us via SST, Strategic Science Talk. If you need the join code, contact me directly. I'm putting the Engaged Day lesson frame on the Secondary Science Shifted Resources Dropbox. There will be no Q3, no Q6 district assessment, and Unit 8 and 9 will only be assessed on the Q3, which will be coming up soon in March 2nd, between March 2nd through the 4th. I hope that this curriculum overview has helped you and will help you to better develop 5E lesson frames for this unit. And if you need anything, please, please, please don't hesitate to call me. I'm here to support you, and I will be glad to come out and plan with you. If you have any questions, contact me directly. Thank you.